Hey leaders, welcome to the show. I am with a wonderful human being named Martin Theis today. Martin is a spiritual coach and teacher who focuses on mental health and well-being through the art of shamanic journeying. And he splits his time between Germany, Norway, and Hawaii. So naturally, as a fellow digital global nomad, I was very curious to talk to Martin. So Martin and I hopped on to get to know one another before recording this episode. And I got to learn about the wealth of knowledge that this man has around building communities and specifically piloting new ways of governance, value exchange, and relationship building inside of these communities. And from where I sit, looking out in the vast landscape of leadership, I find that building this skill set of piloting, iterating, and even failing is so important for the world that we are now getting to build, the collective future that we are now stepping into together. We all get to participate in this. Martin brings some really interesting nuggets around moneyless economies, embodying our values as leaders to really model versions of community and economy that we perhaps have never seen before. If we've never seen it, how can we know how to really participate with it? Often we bring the very things from the old system that we are trying to move away from. So he's seen a lot, and he's going to walk us through today how he has seen different governance and decision-making structures work inside of self-organizing systems, which I believe really is the way of the future on this path to moving from a transactional way of relating into really reciprocal, generous relating across all of our relations. Thanks for being here, and let's get into the episode. Martin and I hopped on a call just to get to know one another, and I was blown away by the wisdom that he has around community building and prototyping different governance and decision-making structures within community. He also has a lot of experience when it comes to curating moneyless economies or different forms of value exchange within community that we might not be used to. So as we collectively move from transactional forms of relating into something more generous and reciprocal, what can we learn from what Martin has seen in these communities where they're not using money? Most of us have never experienced that before and have no idea how to bring ourselves and our mindsets to that sort of environment. So Martin in this episode also shares his perspective on how we as leaders can really model the very values that we're inviting people to move into in some of these newer structures that we are helping to build. Martin also dropped some wisdom around self-organizing systems and adaptive leadership or distributed leadership. And both of these are different, again, than what we typically see inside of a hierarchical organization, for example, where we are turning to one person or a very small subset of people for the answers and for our decision making. This is a very intellectually stimulating episode, and I hope you enjoy traversing these topics as much as Martin and I did. Thanks again for being here, and let's get into the episode. Martin, I am so looking forward to our conversation today. Thank you for being here and being present.
Thank you for the invitation. The pleasure is mine as well. Thank you.
I've been so looking forward to this since we first spoke, and to offer a little context to our listeners, Martin and I met through Podmatch, which is actually almost like a dating service or a dating app for podcast hosts and guests. And I've been really impressed with the quality of guests that I've been finding. And Martin is no exception. We hopped on a few weeks ago to drop into what we might speak about today. And there's a depth. There's such a depth in this being that sits before me and the wisdom that he brings. So Martin, I wanna pick up where we left off last time, because I found this to be so profound and such a beautiful doorway into the conversation I hope we have today. Mm-hmm. And last time I had shared that in the Harvard Executive Education program that I'm a part of, we do this incredible activity called a deep climate story. And essentially, we take the executives through this 100-year timeline where each executive plots on the timeline the year where they think they themselves will die. And if they have children, they then also put a point on the timeline of when they think their children will live to. And from there, we start to weave this context of climate science essentially, and looking at what some of the predictions are from various futurists, and what we know about various systems collapse that we might see in the years to come. And as we're weaving this, some of the executives are starting to tear up, starting to visibly cry. I mean, it's so emotional to not only face our mortality, but also the mortality of our future generations and the reality that they might be stepping into. And by the end of this activity, we paint the story that not all hope is lost. The humans who make it, the humans who design our new world and the systems or community structures that are resilient enough in the future, these are the groups that started to iterate and prototype different ways of being much earlier on in the timeline, in the times that we find ourselves in today. And I've been so excited to talk with you about this, because if we accept this for a moment, that we are in a moment of a deep need to prototype these systems and begin testing, iterating, getting really uncomfortable, moving through our fears, letting go of ego, being comfortable with failing, so that we are not wasting any more time in this prototyping. I mean, there's so much at stake when you look at it through this lens, and you're someone who has some experience looking at these different formats for community governance. And so I just want to invite you into this conversation through that deeper context, and ask, what have you experienced in this realm of prototyping, and can you help paint a picture of what you see possible in this arena? I know that's a big question.
Yeah, yeah. I wanna disclose or make a disclosure. This is just my personal point of view. You know, I everything that comes out of my mouth is tainted. So, but absolutely. I think the most important thing we have to admit right now is that there is this need for progress, and there is this need for everything that you just mentioned. But there are also people who will be holding on steadfastly to the old, to the material kind of security, and to the old ways in terms of uh, system models, organizations, everything. So always to be aware that it's not, we are all off into this new world and we're diving into something unknown, but that there will be resistance from the systems that we are currently facing, you know. So just to frame this in the right way, and from our experience as a collective, but just maybe as a reference for you, I was part of a collective in Germany that was investing their energy into creating spaces, cultural spaces and music spaces for all people without any limitations, access barriers, financial barriers. So we were trying to give everybody a good time basically, and to express ourselves and move the system that we were in, which was difficult in the sense of that the city Cologne was not inviting collectives to create these kind of spaces, but we were uh, vigilantes or kind of guerrilla organizations who did these things, you know. And so my personal point of view on this is that there is a shift going on from pure hedonism, from kind of like partying and self-expression, and to being more aware of the problems that we have, and that we can connect these things with each other. We can dance, we can have a good time, but it's also important that we have a space for maybe workshops or for lectures where people, thought leaders, come up and they just share what they learned. And so I think, at least what I experience in different kinds of places, is that there is an awareness of a need to go forward and to find new solutions, but that it's also difficult. Like, it is really difficult in the sense of, it is grassroots movements who don't make a living out of that, and they're opposing, in a sense, kind of like the thriving industry where money is a big player, and so um, it can feel a little disempowering, to be honest. Like, we are just a small group of people. How should we change the status quo? And sometimes forgetting that, by sharing all that, and by creating more organizations in the image of that, that it is about like the masses, probably. But from all that you said, I would say that the deep dive in the timeline is helping to really see we don't have any time, but also, on the other hand, to not, or to avoid falling into this anxiety trap, that everything is lost. We don't have to even try, because everything's gone down the drain anyways, and seeing, as these executives that you described, seeing how the world is going to change, how their children are going to experience certain things that they experienced probably when they were young, probably in context to nature and the beauty of nature. I think that is what would come to my mind, that if I imagine my kids, if I had kids in 30, 40 years, would be visiting some of my favorite places in the world, and that they might not even exist anymore, let alone the animals and the mass extinction that we're currently like in the middle of. That would definitely, or that resonates with me from that point of view. So
Hmm.
I think it is important to just be aware that we don't have, like, maybe I can't say it like this. There's a famous and beautiful quote from the from Buddha. It's supposed to be from the Buddha, and it's, before enlightenment we chop wood and we carry water, and after enlightenment we chop wood and we carry water. So we have to work anyways, right? We as human beings have to sustain ourselves. We have to do certain things. We have the effort that is going to be life itself. So why not focus it on something that is moving forward, something where we maybe make mistakes, but also where we learn something, where we try stuff out, and rather than kind of like being in this comfortable position where it's all on autopilot and we're just cruising through, I don't know, our life, so that in the end we have 10 10 years, if we're lucky, sometimes, where we get money and don't have to work, right? So why not use that element of, we have to sustain ourselves anyways. Why not make it something beautiful, and an expression of creativity and of life and of beauty, compassion, love? Why not do that instead of just defaulting into this old mode of how we used to do things?
Yeah, beautifully said. I love the imagery of the Buddha quote that you brought in there. And I think there are a few threads that I want to pull on here that feel really significant. And one is the appreciation for you naming that this can all be true. Our context can be sort of spiraling into a lot of complexity or chaos or systems collapse. And we don't need to be all gloomsday about that. In fact, to be purely in the negative or to be in the fear, we lose access to that executive function in our brain. We lose access to the hope and the love within that keeps us going even through those hard times. So having this positive outlook of, yes, let me keep chopping the wood and collecting the water, and let me maybe do this in a way where I have a bit of a longer term view on how the way that I chop wood or where I collect the water might impact future generations. And I also want to touch on what you mentioned about money as well. The image that came to mind as you shared about how, as we seek to change, as we seek to evolve these systems in the best ways that we can, that there will be a lot of resistance to that. And what comes to mind is almost this biological image, right, of when the body has a virus or has these foreign invaders that come into it, the whole system, as a form of self-preservation and protection and longevity, right, it goes into this survival mode. And it sees that those invaders as a direct threat, and it's going to do what it needs to do to survive. And so I often see that biological metaphor in how we approach change, and how I empathize actually with the monetary systems that we have and the hierarchical systems that have thrived on collecting and maybe even hoarding power, for example, or have really benefited from creating these wealth gaps. These have become strategies for the continued longevity of that type of system. So it's like, yes, of course it's going to go down swinging. Of course it's going to go down fighting. And how do we love it all the way through? How do we hospice that system all the way through to its death day and let that actually be a beautiful thing? Because then the energy that was embedded in that system and the resources that had been sucked up by that system are redistributed elsewhere. Because the other thing I really resonate with in what you said is, when you step outside of the system, it does feel disempowering that there is often not money, and we do have these basic needs to support ourselves. So how do we lovingly divest from the systems that have maybe grown so large that they are harming us and our planet, and at the same time be experimenting not with a doomsday urgency need, because that's a red flag too, that takes us out of our own alignment, but be doing this out of love for the planet, love for future generations, whatever our reason might be. So yeah, there's so much in what you're saying. And I'm curious as I say all that, what shows up for you in what you've seen, or what you hope for in the future.
Yeah, I think it is like when you started speaking, I thought about a lecture from Eckhart Tolle, and where he just uses the meta, or the that higher plane that you described about consciousness itself, that even if the whole planet would experience a mass extinction and 90% of life would be wiped out, consciousness itself would stay. The all the experience, everything, all that state of consciousness would be reborn, and would be reborn even more with more complexity, with more awareness, with more kind of like with a higher state of consciousness in itself. And just that as a context is for me kind of like in that emotional pacifier, or maybe even spiritual pacifier, that I have to suck on sometimes when I get too gloomy, because I feel like, oh my god, everything is going down the drain and nothing is happening, and everybody is just like totally absorbed with their own individual lives. And so when I'm on that spiraling, or on that spiral down, then I just remember, okay, well, consciousness itself is still here, won't go away, and we like it's all going to be fine in a sense. That was one thing that I thought of when you were speaking, and that it is our responsibility, to be honest, to learn as human beings to be able to see the beauty in the destruction, to be able to kind of like see the glass half full. We are trained in a like in a great way, at least in all those places where I went to so far. I have been mostly in the West, as you said, or the global North. So everywhere I went, I saw that there is a great disposition to negativity, or to being socialized in a way where it is focusing on the bad things. And I think that is our greatest responsibility as human beings, to be able to elevate through that pattern into something where it's getting more constructive. Because, as you mentioned, the worst thing we can do is just write it off, think it's all past, anything we can do anyways, and to let go. And then all the creativity, all the systems, everything that we could come up with, if we stay productive, if we stay positive, they we won't have access to that. So I think that is the most important thing, to find each person individually, but also in these organizations, in these systems, in these communities, to find a way to keep that elevated state in a way, and to regain it. Kind of like when we do sports, an athlete who's really good, in good shape, their pulse is going down really fast when they had like a really extensive or intensive peak with their heart rate, right? And we measure how well someone is trained, how fast that pulse goes down into the normal average kind of zone. And so to be able, emotionally and spiritually and with our whole being, to kind of like find that balance again when there is a negative impact, when I had a argument or a stressful situation or something bad happened, how long does it take for me to regain my composure? I think that is kind of that what I think about what we have to do. Because when we get to do that, then we are able to help others to just be there with that state. We don't have to do anything, to just like be in that awareness, and to help them, therefore, to regain their composure and to find that balance. And I think organizations and communities who are able to facilitate that process and to help each other out are much more resilient than others, where everybody fights for themselves and tries to get ahead, and on and on.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that that is so, it's so important that we investigate what maybe these new reflexes are, or these responses within us, this, because it almost feels like a skill set to be able to navigate with self-regulation in our systems, to stay online, to stay connected, to be able to nurture ourselves through really difficult things, or show up for one another. That it feels so important that we build that muscle, and that we develop those reflexes, especially if those triggering or difficult events become more prevalent in a way. And the other thing that you mentioned around sort of incentives, right? I think what I'm seeing in what you just shared there is our incentive structure also changing at the same time that these reflexes grow. We've lived inside of a system for very long where the individualism, or the individual gain rather than community focus, has been the way, at least in the global north. And you see these very deep patterns of extraction, consumerism, overindulgence. All of these behaviors have almost become the cornerstone, or the value set that sit at our basic incentives. And you mentioned music earlier, and I can't help but think of Burning Man as an example, where there's a very different set of values, or a very different set of of simple rules that that community convenes around.
Hmm.
And there's this beautiful ebb and flow of, okay, within these agreements, within these very basic and simple rules, we get to create, we get to interact with our changing environment, and the art or the offerings that others might be gifting in that particular economy, or microeconomy. So I want to ask more about, in your experience in the collective, um, talk to us about the incentives or the value set that existed at the core of that,
Hmm.
and what were some of those skill sets or reflexes that were then unlocked because of, say, a different value set than we're used to now.
So when you were speaking, and I think it's interesting that you asked that specific question, is that all in all, when the last festival that we did as a collective was 2017, and when the final building and creation phase of the festival started, we were probably 4 weeks ahead of the festival. We were there, and then 2 weeks after, and the 5 days of the festival. And during that time, like you said, it is a microcosm, and it's so interesting. I mean, this is the probably the most beautiful experience I personally had in my life. And during this experience, we didn't need any money. I didn't have my wallet for 8 weeks, and I didn't need to pay for anything except for when we left that microcosm and went to some place where we needed to buy tools or resources or anything like that. But we were in this microcosm where everybody was just enjoying what they did and building out of that out of that love, out of that mode, right? And so because of this, the more people came to this festival site, they entered into this loving space of creation, of creativity, and empowerment, because we had principles where it's about everybody is able to do everything. We had hierarchies. We tried to have them as kind of like equally distributed as possible, but information power, or whatever you want to call it, is there. So we were aware that it's not possible to have no hierarchy, or to have like a completely flat hierarchy, but to at least give all the people the chance to participate and do whenever they wanted to do something. So you're in this completely self-organized space where more and more people come in, because the festival is coming closer and closer, and at some point festival guests are coming. But because our principles were that it was more of a, we create this together than a service industry. So even though people purchased tickets, they knew that there was going to be work to be done, and that they participated, and that they helped out, and that food and drinks were given for donation on a donations base. So the whole system was so foreign to a large group of people who had never experienced anything like that. Yet at the same time, being enough people who held that space, that the newcomers who had never experienced that were kind of like gently taught, or gently kind of like introduced into such a foreign space, in a sense, you know? And so I still remember my brother, who always heard of this collective but had never been part of any parties in Cologne because he was living somewhere else. And when he, after the first evening, came to me, his mind was blown. He said, "Dude, I had no idea that what's going on here. I've never seen anything like this, you know?" So, and that's what I feel is the beauty of these concepts, that it is difficult for people who are have never experienced anything like that to imagine it, because it's, I would say, impossible. But once they experience it, they're just like mesmerized, and they feel like this is unknown. I never knew this was possible, you know, and this is just what I wanted to share. Maybe I went a little bit off the track from your question, but the principles are probably um, found in equal rights. You know, love what you do. Um, Everybody is invited to participate and create, make mistakes, and yeah. So
Yeah,
absolutely.
it's amazing. I think sometimes when we don't have a mental construct or we've never seen that example, it can be really hard to fathom or to imagine into what these different spheres might be. But especially in a festival scene or this microcosm of different values that you're describing, there's something happening on an embodied level, it sounds like, as well, where it's almost like being children again, right? Where we get to witness another person showing up differently, showing up, interacting with others in a different way, moving from a different set of incentives, and getting to emulate that as a form of learning. So what I love about this microcosm of the collective you're describing, and the events or experiences that you put on, is that it's almost like a form of play to get to come back to our infancy in this completely new construct as newcomers, to get to experience a different way of being in community, a different way of value exchange, a different way of offering our gifts. And I almost think you can you can explain with words or through mental constructs till the cows come home to someone
Yeah.
who's never experienced this. But there's nothing like getting inside of that experience and having your body pick up on all of those millions of signals and observations and have that aha moment of, oh my gosh, it's blowing my mind, but on a heart level, on an embodied level, I'm getting how different this is. And now you have access to
Hmm.
those other constructs. So I actually love this form of piloting in this way. Like this microcosm is such a test of a non-monetary system, for example. And I'm curious, within that setting, what what behaviors, right? Because most of us, unless we've been in a festival setting like this,
Hmm.
we've never experienced life outside of a monetary system,
Hmm.
most of us.
Yeah.
So when you're in that setting, what are some of the behaviors that you noticed, and what did you experience in yourself? What was coming online for you as a human being inside of this very different construct?
So I would say I have, or s- the the group that did the majority of the planning and the whole structure. I would say we had a special function, or a special kind of like, maybe just, it is difficult to explain because we were outside a little bit of that festival. We weren't guests per se, but through the work that we had done and through the good organization and everything that came together, we were more guests than we would have imagined we were able to be. So I thought I would be just like running from one task to the other and having no time to just be there and experience it. But what I heard from some people is that some people used or abused the system of donating by just not doing it, by
Mm,
giving little. If you have a recommendation, this food costs around, maybe, let's say, just for the sake of argument, $5, and somebody sees that and kind of like tests how with how little can I get away, can I give one, can I give 50 cent or whatever. So I think there are ways when people are experiencing such a thing for the first time, it is important to educate in a sense, but also to accept that, it is a recommendation. It's not mandatory. So if you, for whatever reason, maybe you don't have any money, maybe you're, um, how do you say that? If you're kind of like holding on to money, and stingy is the word that I was looking for. If you're stingy and you're just like not giving, so it is whatever the reason, your mental state is still contracted in a sense. Maybe you have money in that system, but your kind of like your self image lets you act in a way that is just like not in line with the festival. So it doesn't matter. And I think we didn't really judge it. In the end, it was important that we broke even, which we didn't. We had a great loss in a sense and had to go through pains of refinancing and doing a lot of work to do that. But that is what you talked about. It is failing at some point. We had this beautiful experience that was carried by love and all these positive things, but there were undersides. There were negative consequences of having tried something like this. And so I would say, for people who are in this context experiencing something like that for the first time, my personal rule of thumb is we need a two-third, one-third balance. We need two-thirds of the people who hold that space, who know that space, who create that space, who are able to see the system and understand the system and are feeding that system with their positive energy. And then we will have a certain amount of people who are carried by that, who want to be carried by that, and some others who use and abuse that system. But I think, at least in my experience, if we have a certain ratio, then the whole system, or the whole event, in our understanding, was able to carry that to some extent. If it drops below a certain balance, then the other state of mind takes over, and then it's, what can I get out of it? And that's when the whole kind of, that's at the heart of gentrification, what I think. At some point, when lively neighborhoods that are very artsy, very cultural, very much alive, when people are forced, because they can't afford the rates anymore for the apartments or whatever, or the stores, then at some point that aliveness is lost. And I would say that is something that we just have to be mindful about. It's neither good nor bad. It's just like we have to steer that as leaders, as organizations. We have to know, at some point, our organizational culture will drop into the other kind of like extreme, when we don't have an eye on that.
Right. Right. I there's there's a piece here that I just love about it. Feels so caring, actually, in what you're saying, to keep a pulse on these people, these communities, the newcomers. There's a level of care that I hear in what you're saying around, at least in the festival setting, taking someone sort of under your wing. And as long as that ratio is there, then you can have this enculturation process, in a way of unlearning some of the impulses, or the beliefs, the previous relational patterns that might have been your norm. And in the examples you mentioned, sometimes that can show up as a taking mentality, as an extractive pattern of, how much can I get away with, how much can I get for free here, and have that still be okay. And I think a lot of this has to do with the previous patterning in our relationship to money and colonial ways of thinking. And so if we can allow for enough process time, and a pathway where the existing community is, who's already embodying the new way, or the different way, can help the newcomers unlearn all of that, and begin to experience or replace it with a different way of seeing things, or a different relationship to money, to move from a transactional exchange to where you're taking or extracting into something that's more reciprocal and life generating and very generous, actually, like to unlock this flow of resources across people. I'm very hopeful that we can get there, and maybe there are always people who will take advantage of the system, as you mentioned, or fall back into that extractive colonial way of being. But I think if we hit a point where the majority of a community is embodying a non-extractive relationship and a non-colonial programming, as the operating system that we hold, that maybe there are ways that we could point out those behaviors, or invite, call people in, right, to a different way, and sort of lovingly prevent the taking advantage of over time. And maybe there are consequences or boundaries that get enforced when people can't. um, but that unlearning piece in what you're mentioning, and keeping an eye on another person's process, feels so caring to me, and not in the other example that you mentioned with gentrification, like not mistaking aliveness in a community for something else, if it isn't producing the value that we as the colonial thinkers want to generate from that community, or the value that we specifically want to extract from it, to understand that we're looking at a community through that mindset of this town is a thing, these people are things that will move around or reconstruct. It's such a it's a messed up way of seeing the world, very mechanistic in a way, very transactional. But how can we unlearn that through playing in these spaces of non-monetary exchange, of festivals, music, art? It's a very safe place to learn, I
Hmm.
feel. And I think we need more of these containers to learn and be able to make mistakes, and maybe we do take advantage in a moment, and then we reflect on that and think, ooh, well, that didn't actually feel good. What made me do that? Like, have that self-reflective quality. um so yeah, so I'll stop there and see what comes up on your end. But yeah, it's a beautiful picture that you're painting as a possibility for prototyping these things.
Yeah, I think, as you mentioned, it is. I think the possibility to make mistakes that we won't like. I'm looking at this through the eyes or through the lens of an entrepreneur, but also someone who is an innovator or a creator, an artist. To know that we might not be able to figure this out in our first attempt. No, not only because not only, but we might have the right intentions, but that doesn't guarantee success in the sense that we will figure it out right away. And so I feel like looking at my experiences and at the negative sides of our collective, and in the end the shattering process of how it all came to an end and why, is a big learning, which where I feel like, are we doomed, even though we create these beautiful bubbles in a sense, or utopian visions, and in the end we fall short and we make mistakes, and the people outside say, well, I could have told you this before, that it doesn't work, but we gain something. And so I feel like, um, Wayne Dyer, I'm sorry if I come in with so many spiritual teachers today, but Wayne Dyer said, inch by inch, we're making progress, so slowly, but we're like it is every century, just a little bit further. I don't know if we can see it that way, that we have a limited amount of time, but I feel like we're doing our best as a society, and everybody does their best anyways, and some people it just comes out differently. And so to just be able to make mistakes and to learn from these mistakes, get up again, this approach of making it right in the first attempt, or making it right in general, like, is my inner vision is that at some point I have it made, I'm done, I don't have to learn anymore, no more mistakes, everything is like enlightenment, right? And then coming back to that quote again, but what happens after that? We still have to chop wood and carry water. So there is no end, that infinity of evolution, that process is ongoing. Like, until life on this planet exists, there will be this kind of process of trial and error, and just like standing up again, trying something new, learning from that, and then building the next, or carving the next stepping stone, whatever we want to call it. And so I feel that is probably the most important thing, to just know we will fail at some point in some extent, but that is not the problem. It is, are we going to get up, learn from that, and kind of like do it in a way where we share that human element of love, compassion, and this kind of like um, brotherhood, sisterhood, whatever you want to call it, that family, the human family on this planet. I might be a little bit soft with this, but I feel really we are one big family, and there's no reason to treat each other the way we do. And at some point, it would be nice. It would be nice if we find a way to actually live together uh, nicely. We can have arguments. Nobody says it's going to be boring. There's just like peace and eternal bliss, but it is a different question of how we resolve these arguments, and how we interact with each other and the planet.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I love the language around being one big family, and I too am very hopeful that we can find loving ways to interact with one another. And I feel like as entrepreneurs, this relationship to failure and sort of rebranding it, if you will, as this is very much a part of our evolution. We're, as humans, we're always going to be trying and failing and learning, really. I mean, we're, as a species, we are exceptional, really, at learning, through our ability to self-reflect and to make subtle tweaks to the nuances of how we show up and how we try the next time. But there's a lot of appreciation in what you're saying around, and let's not forget the realism that exists alongside or underneath the utopian or idealistic view of what's possible, because at the end of the day, we still have bodies, we still have homes to care for and clean and build, and there's a simplicity, in fact, in the care that we get to have, even in the mundane, and bring that consciousness through. And I think to live in a world that's only in that blissed out joyful state, you don't actually appreciate it if you don't also have the duality of the suffering and of some of the difficulty that life might present. So yeah, it's an interesting thing that polarity creates. And I feel like it comes down to how we choose to relate to suffering, how we relate to failure, or how we relate to doing the hard things, because these conversations that we have with one another in conflict will always be hard. Being vulnerable is hard in a lot of ways. So um, there's there's something about our humanness in what you're saying that I'm appreciating, and the granularity of let's not get whisked away in the idealism here and the utopianism, because there's a very real thing happening in the physical plane. Um, so I would love to actually go there next and into some of that practicality piece you mentioned earlier about still having hierarchy, for example, to be able to make decisions. And I imagine that there was so much work and physical labor, let alone the emotional labor that would have gone into the creation of the festival. So I guess what are on that practical level, what what have you seen work really well in terms of how we relate to that work? What has maybe worked for you as a person? I'm curious about the granularity and the nuance that you've seen.
I think what worked well in a sense, and I think I have to put the context of the hierarchy into a little bit more perspective, that the in the event of or in the work that we did, there was meant to be no hierarchy, but because people are people and decide, I just want to do this a little bit, I want to invest maybe a little bit of time each month, and there are people who say, I'm all in, I want everything, I want the whole experience, I want to be part in every kind of like subgroup, and I want to know what's going on, and I'm interested in this whole experience. That alone creates the difference in hierarchical structures, because some people know more than others just because they are involved more. And so that as a context for what I meant with the hierarchy. Other than that, we didn't have the strictest form of organization where it is um, everybody has to say yes. And if somebody says, I'm not on board, then we have to renegotiate. I don't know what the term for that in English is, but we didn't have that. We went on a veto based system where, as long as nobody was giving a veto saying, no, I'm not on board with this, I'm not supporting this in this way, this is not a way for me to go forward, then it would be renegotiated. But as long as somebody said, well, I'm not really a fan of this decision, but I'm okay to go along, then we would just go along as a community. And as you mentioned, it is much more complex and effortful to sit there with 40 people and to discuss how we go forward and to resolve all these issues that people have. And I remember that we in I was living in a communal kind of like apartment with 7 people, and we were all more or less involved into this organization. And the sister of my friend came and she said, you're always discussing so much, you're constantly kind of like discussing things and talking about stuff, and I'm not used to that. That's like, that feels like so much effort in life, you know, to constantly discuss and smooth things out through words, right? And so I think that is one thing that is a little bit strenuous, maybe, that the larger the group gets, that we have to find ways to make this sustainable and to make this efficient. And at some point we can't just discuss it all out and everybody has the same right to decide what's going on, and splitting groups into smaller sections, and creating some hierarchy that is necessary in order to save time, because we can't talk 2 days, like 10 hours every day, in order to get to the next step. We need to have some pre-decisions made, we need to delegate. And so I think that it is that motivation, or the intrinsic aspiration to have no hierarchy as a group that we had, or to have as little as possible, and to go from there, and then to find ways to create a subsystem that works with our moralic stand or moral views, or whatever standards that we set up, you know. And so it is, but everything, like always, I I just maybe a short excursion. I spent 2 days, 2 years without a cell phone, and that was a long time ago, but it was creating a lot of work for me to find solutions to problems that people with cell phones didn't have, you know. So if we have certain standards or certain aspirations that we want to do certain things differently than the status quo, then we have to be ready to to do more work, because it will be.
Yeah, yeah. I couldn't agree more. I think within authentic relating, or this not consensus based, but this um we're gonna churn through a lot of data and discussion, and there's veto power within that. It does take a lot of relational input or relational energy. It takes a lot of emotional input, essentially. And yeah, I think when I think about the benefits of this, though, I can't help but feel like a lot of that is probably worth it, especially in the beginning, because I think sometimes, to your point, there's a tendency to want to swing really hard the other way if we are in aversion to the hierarchy, because the hierarchy, like, we blame it, we think it has hurt us, we think it's the source of a lot of our problems. Now we might want to completely make that obsolete and swing really hard into the other direction of a more flat, consensus based decision making set. But I think in reality, the balance or the harmony often lies in the middle, and in more of the integration. And I love what you said about subgroups, basically, where it's maybe there's some sort of hybrid here, where you have more decentralized branches of decision making on specific things. um, but there's also this element of what you're saying in maybe the people who hold the most quote unquote power for decision making within the hierarchies. It's not based on positional power, it's not based on their skin color, it's based on, that's the person with the experience and the knowledge and who is embodying these values best. And so let us run the decisions up that hierarchy to the best fit for all of that. And to do that in these subgroups or localized pockets, that can then self-manage based on the experience and the wisdom that's in the system, and not some of these more biased or perverse ways of structuring hierarchy. So it's like, I'm just hearing so loud and clear in what you're saying that the hierarchy itself is not bad, but the design principles we've maybe used within hierarchy are can be harmful. So what's the new set of how we use that? um and again, I feel that maybe the solution is somewhere in the middle, and I think that's kind of what we're learning into as well. So does that match the experience that you've had?
I think from what I heard you saying, that the hierarchy itself is probably more can more be seen for people who hear this discussion as an informal kind of hierarchy or an informal kind of leadership. It is not actually a position where people would be like perceived in that position, or where they would get more decision making power. They would just have to step up with their knowledge and share that and say, think about this because we are doing this and that, and then to kind of like delegate it back to the group to be really responsible in this leadership position, to still know that I might be the only person who has this general overview, but this doesn't make me the person who makes the decision. This makes me the counterpart, or the person who just relays the information and what other people need to know in order to make a decision that is more appropriate to be made, in a sense. I just wanted to maybe clarify that a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And the question I think about that model is just, I think it is group intelligence, to be honest. When you were speaking and when I was listening to your recapitulation of what you heard, I feel like it is probably a trust and a confidence in the collective mind, in the group process, to be able to trust, well, maybe this is not my decision per se, I would be going a different route, but because of the way we came to the conclusion, I trust in the process that this will be the right decision. And at the same time, I, even if I wanted to, I could not recreate the festival. And I was among those people who were really, really deep into the organization, realizing that it was only possible for us to create such an outstanding experience for all people involved because of everyone who was part of it, and every kind of like individual that created that collective consciousness, or that creative mindset together. And I think that is an important thing, to trust in that we don't have to all be experts. It is enough if we come together, if our intentions are aligned, in the sense that we all know what we know and we all know the destination where we want to go. Then with that intention set, it is possible to create the most magnificent things, because we're coming together as a group, and the synergy is there. So I think that is one of the things that is really important to understand, that when I would bring something up in the beginning of my work in this collective, 2013, I would say something wrong in quotation, and I would feel bad because I earned opposition, and some people were maybe arguing, and the I wanted to be the person who says something smart, or something that is bringing us to that solution of the problem. I don't want to be the person where everybody says, no, we're not doing that. But I realized over the years that the opposition is oftentimes a vital part of that solution finding, that where the group realizes, no, this is actually quite the opposite of what we want, by realizing that, being able to formulate what we want and then to find a better solution. So at some point I eased into, well, maybe this is something that the group doesn't want to hear, but it is something that needs to be said, and to trust in that process. It might not bring us to the solution directly, but it might be able to bring us around to the solution.
Right. The trust even in the opposition is so nurturing, in what you're saying. So collective intelligence based on trust. We don't all have to be the experts. As you said that, I felt my whole body relax, of like, oh my gosh, yes. Through positional power within hierarchies, when if we believe in the illusion that as a leader we're supposed to know all the answers, that is so much pressure
Yeah.
to put on ourselves. And it simply isn't true. We, no single one of us is going to be the expert of all things, or have all the answers. So this distributed leadership model that you're alluding to, and the distributed wisdom within it, and sort of letting that organically show up, turning to the person that has that wisdom. And even if you speak to offer a solution, that can be really, really powerful as a prototype, essentially, where now people have something to engage around or to react with. And I think if we as leaders cannot have the attachment to the reaction that the collective intelligence then has, and not make ourselves bad if or wrong if the response from the collective intelligence is a no. Can we be okay with a no, and not make a story about ourselves for being wrong? So it's, yeah, I think this is maybe a really beautiful place to begin to wrap up our conversation of the potential of collective intelligence within groups, and that so much of that can be built on trust. And I've heard a few people say this now, so I'm glad that it's becoming a bit of a rallying um, a rallying tagline in a way of the currency of the future is trust rather than money.
Hmm.
So the currency of the future is trust, and I relax into that as well, especially as we fight for a world that is more transparent, and where we see through a lot of the opacity or the masks that people will wear to try and control, extract, manipulate, whatever it might be. So I'm curious, Martin, could you perhaps leave us with any wisdom on your experience of trust in these communities?
Trust in the communities or trust per se. That is I don't know. It's probably at this point where I'm at right now, it's probably both, you know? So I feel, going back to what we spoke about, the finding the glass half full or seeing the glass half full, that it is always our opportunity to open our hearts and stay open in our hearts. And Michael Singer said it, that if you don't, I think I have to paraphrase because it's been a long time since I read his book, but you stay open by not closing your heart, I think. So by staying open, um, using whatever happens to us, and whenever we're disappointed, when I'm sad, angry, all the negative in quotation emotions, looking, using self-reflection and seeing where am I holding on, as in the I want to be the leader who makes remarks that are smart and bringing solutions, letting go of that principle and seeing, well, there's value in what I said, even though I thought it's bad, And so I feel like when we're able to stay open and to and inspect our emotional landscape, especially when it's negative, but also when it's positive, and to stop kind of like holding on to that, we build trust, mostly in ourselves, that whatever comes on my way, I will be able to see the beauty in that, and to forgive myself and others for whatever experiences that I make, and to trust in that no matter what happens, we will find a way. We will be like, we're so adaptable, we're such a adaptable species. If we're able to make the next step in the evolution, and kind of like put our ego in its right place, not to kind of like uh desolidify it or bring it into like non-existence, but to just use our mind rather than our mind using us, then I think we're really set. We're set for the future, so um I don't know. I love the quote of, the mind is a beautiful servant but a cruel master, So
Yes.
in a sense, to just really trust in the process, that's probably it.
It's amazing. Yeah. I love that quote as well. Yeah. Martin, thank you so much, and thank you for leaving us with this sentiment around trust within as well, and our ability to nurture that, to be self-responsible enough to form that relationship within ourselves, that we can trust ourselves to do anything, to adapt, and to pick ourselves up even when things get hard. So thank you for bringing us to this lovely final note in our conversation, and it has been such a joy to traverse these topics with you. Thank you so much for your wisdom and your presence today.
Thank you.
If you found this video valuable, please be sure to like, subscribe to the channel, and head to livingleaders.org to hop on the Living Leaders newsletter, where we are always sending out new tools, templates, and practices to deepen your conscious leadership practice. And And if you have a bit of time to continue to do that today, I highly recommend that you check out this video next.